a massive crypto purchase from Strategy. We're also going to talk about Bitmine. We just made a very large Ether purchase. I'm going to talk to you about Ethereum. We've got a lot of news today. We're going to talk about LayerZero, Kelp, the hack. We're also going to talk about a token that absolutely exploded and then completely crashed. I'm going to tell you about Ripple and quantum computing. So yeah, a lot to cover. Hello everyone and welcome to Crypto Red, the crypto news channel. As for crypto prices, we have Bitcoin at $76,000. Looking at the market as a whole, some things are up, some things are down. But yeah, let's not talk about prices. Let's get straight into strategy. Take a look at the announcement they just made. Michael Saylor has just announced a purchase of 34,000 Bitcoin for $2.5 billion. That is huge. It's been a while since we've seen a buy that big. Strategy now holds more than 800,000 BTC. That is absolutely enormous. We're talking about roughly more than 3.8% of the total 21 million Bitcoin supply that will ever exist. So how did they do it? Of course, it's thanks to their STRC product, which is getting a lot of attention right now. I made a dedicated video about STRC. They're managing to raise a lot of money and sell a lot of STRC. They also issued more shares, and as you know, as long as the MicroStrategy shares is valued above the value of the Bitcoin they hold, they can keep issuing shares. And from their point of view, and especially from Strategy's point of view, that works very well because it lets them keep accumulating BTC. So yeah, this is going to continue. I really don't think Michael Saylor is going to stop. I'll be honest, I thought we would see Bitcoin move up more with the purchase of this size, but apparently didn't have that much impact. Then again, the Bitcoin market is so big now that maybe a few $1 billion over the course of a week is just not enough to move the price that much anymore. And just to remind you, they hold an absolutely astronomical amount of BTC. The average purchase price is around $76,000. So at the current price, the average cost basis has simply, it's almost the same as the price of BTC right now. In 2025, they were still below 500,000 BTC, and now they are at 800,000 BTC. I think they've overtaken BlackRock in terms of the largest known BTC holders publicly as a public company or publicly tradable on exchanges. So yeah, what Strategy is doing is incredibly powerful. But Saylor isn't the only one doing this. On a smaller scale, but this time in Ethereum, you have Bitmine. Bitmine is doing something very similar. They just announced a $200 million purchase of Ether, around 100,000 ETH. That's also huge because they're getting closer to the 5 million Ether tokens, which is a lot. They're almost operating on the same kind of scale as Strategy, but as I said, relative to Ethereum. And the main difference is that Bitcoin's supply is capped, whereas Ethereum's supply is not capped. So with Bitcoin, when someone like Michael Saylor buys a certain percentage of the supply, that percentage has really significance because the total supply is fixed. With Ether, the supply can increase. I've got plenty of other things to tell you, but first, you know what? Let's talk about the hack. Let's talk about the Kelp and LayerZero hack. At this point, we are clearly looking at LayerZero hack. I told you yesterday I went back and reviewed everything that's been said about the exploit and about the LayerZero side of things, and honestly, it confirms the issue is really coming from LayerZero. Even the RPC, those servers I mentioned, they were compromised. Well, from what we understand, those are actually servers owned by LayerZero itself. That's their infrastructure. This isn't some third-party provider getting hacked. It's really them. And in the communication, they're clearly trying to shift the blame toward Kelp, saying it's a Kelp issue, but no, it's LayerZero which was hacked. Now look at what happened. We had around $290 million stolen. And then, yesterday, Arbitrum managed to urgently recover $71 million in ETH that was sitting on an address on Arbitrum controlled by the attacker. And here's where it gets interesting. Arbitrum has a security council. Security council on the blockchain. There are 12 members, and if 9 of them agree, they can basically do whatever they want on the network. So what did they do? They seized the hackers' fund and moved them to another address. After that, there'll be a governance vote to decide what to do with those funds. about but like I said, $70 million. Now, first reaction for most people is, wait, this is crazy. Arbitrum is centralized. But yes, it is. It is centralized. I've been saying this forever. L2s today are not decentralized. They have control points. And here, that control point is the Security Council. This isn't new. It's documented. Everyone knows it. They have the power and they use it. They're elected to do that also. And honestly, I think they're right to do it. I'm very pro decentralization, but Arbitrum is not fully decentralized yet. So if they have the ability to act and they don't use it, that will be a bigger problem. The goal is for a blockchain to evolve to a point where this kind of council doesn't even exist anymore. But we're not there yet. So they acted. It makes sense. Better than letting North Korea walk away with $70 million. You just need to be aware of this. I keep saying when you're using an L2, you're not getting the same level of security as on Ethereum. There are different risks. Things like this can happen. And the worst case scenario, what we saw here was used. What if what we saw here was used by a hacker? If someone like North Korea were to target the signers of the Security Council, they could potentially move anything on Arbitrum. Now, it's supposed to be well secured, but still, you need to understand that risk. That's why L2s don't offer the same guarantees as Ethereum. On Ethereum, no one can seize your funds unless the entire chain forks. That's literally the only scenario. Or if you use a token that is centralized. Now, regarding the hack itself, we also got a report from Llama Risk, which is a service provider of Aave in charge of risk analysis. They outlined several scenarios depending on how Kelp decides to distribute losses, whether it's applied to the RSE token to all the holders of token or only to L2 users of the token. The most likely scenario is that the losses will be spread across all users, and in that case, Aave's bad debt will drop to around $123 million, which is much lower than what people initially feared. They already have about $50 million in their umbrella fund, so that leave around $60 or $70 million to cover. But now, with the 71 million recovered on Arbitrum, that number could go down even further. So in the end, I think Aave might only need to use somewhere around $40 to $50 million from its treasury in the worst case scenario to make users whole. So all right. So I think they're going to come out of this okay in the end. It's not going to be catastrophic. The second scenario, which would be more impactful for Aave, is if Kelp decides basically that only L2 users are affected. And in that case, it would actually create a bigger loss for Aave. Interestingly, that's where Aave will take the biggest hit because they're also heavily present across different L2s. There's a lot of capital deployed there, and they could end up with something like $230 million in bad debt. So now the big question is, the funds that were recovered by Arbitrum, how are they going to be redistributed? If that money is only redistributed to Arbitrum users, that would actually help reduce the bad debt there significantly. So there are still a lot of unknowns, but you get the idea. If this mostly ends up being a socialized loss, which is honestly the most likely scenario, then Aave probably gets through this relatively well. It wouldn't be catastrophic as it might seem. The real issue this time is the longer the situation drags on, the more liquidity pressure builds on Aave. Kelp needs to make a decision quickly. The worst case scenario I see if Kelp doesn't decide anytime soon and instead goes into some kind of bankruptcy process that drags on for months, that's when things get messy. You could end up with over $1 billion locked on Aave because all those RSE tokens are basically frozen. When we talk about bad debt right now, we're still assuming that there's real ETH back in those RSE tokens. But if these Kelp tokens stay locked for a long time, that's the real nightmare scenario. Hopefully it doesn't happen. No one else. We've got Kelp DAO and LayerZero pointing fingers at each other, but clearly the issue starts with LayerZero. Then Kelp also shares responsibility because they should have secured their LayerZero integration better. And honestly, Aave also has a share of responsibility here. They accepted these Kelp tokens as collateral. They went through governance, discussion, and all of that, but they didn't properly assess the risks or put strict enough limits on it. That's also how we ended up here. So in reality, all three players share responsibility. And at the end of the day, let's not forget, every user who deposits money into protocol needs to understand the risks. In crypto, if there is a bailout, great, but you shouldn't expect anyone to come save you if things go wrong. I do think the situation might end up relatively well, hopefully, but that's not always how these things plays out. So yeah. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the token that completely exploded and crashed just as hard. I wanted to mention Rave.io. I saw it a few days ago, maybe a few weeks ago, but I didn't talk about it at the time because it looked like a typical hype-driven token, something that suddenly reaches multi-billion dollars valuation with no real reason, and it crashed even faster than it went up. This is clearly price manipulation, and we had Zach XBT calling on exchanges to investigate what was going on. And right after that, the price completely collapsed. Honestly, I don't focus on this kind of stuff. You know me, I'm not into speculating on random tokens that have no long-term value or fundamentals. I try not to push people toward those kinds of plays. But yeah, I wanted to talk about it now that it's crashed. Next, Ripple just announced that they're aiming to be quantum resistant by 2028. That's really interesting. We've already seen Ethereum's roadmap targeting around 2029. Google has also been talking about the major to be resistant by 2029. And things are clearly accelerating on that front. And a lot of projects are now publishing their roadmaps for quantum resistance. And that's a very good thing. I like seeing the industry take the risk seriously. Now, I'm waiting to see Bitcoin move in that direction as well, because there are early steps, but we're not there yet. And yeah, I know there have been a lot of hacks lately, but don't be scared. Don't be scared. Don't panic and sell everything. Just be calm, study the protocols, don't put your money in stuff you don't understand, and yeah, be careful. All right, that's it for today. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow for what's next. Bye-bye. Take care.